The warning siren screamed across Nexus Prime as massive ships dropped out of hyperspace. The Galactic Council's sensors had never seen anything like them. These vessels were huge, dark, and covered in scars from countless battles. Their weapons were powered up and ready to fire. Counselor Vexhai stared at the display screen in shock. His blue skin turned pale as he counted the ships. There were thousands of them. Each one was bigger than anything his people had ever built. The markings on their hulls made his blood run cold. They were human ships. "This is impossible," whispered Admiral Court from his floating chair. His tentacles shook with fear. "We destroyed Earth 50 years ago. Every human died in the bombardment. We made sure of it. But the evidence was right there on the screens. Ship after ship filled the space around their home system. Each vessel bore the same symbol, a blue and green planet surrounded by stars. Earth. The world they had turned to ash and radiation. On the main display, a message began to play. The face that appeared was human, female with gray hair and hard eyes. Her uniform was black with silver trim. Behind her stood other humans, all wearing the same cold expression. "People of the galaxy," the woman said. Her voice was calm but full of anger. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Fleet. 50 years ago, your council voted to destroy our home. 10 billion humans died in nuclear fire. You thought you had ended the threat we posed to your perfect order." She paused, letting her words sink in. Around the council chamber, representatives from 1,000 worlds sat in stunned silence. Some had been there when the vote was taken. Others had inherited the shame of their predecessors. "You were wrong," Admiral Chen continued. "We survived. We grew stronger. We learned. And now we have come home to settle the score. The galaxy will tremble not because we bring war, but because we bring justice." The transmission cut to black. In the silence that followed, Vexhai could hear his own heart beating. The human fleet hung in space like a sword over their necks, waiting, watching. Supreme Chancellor Mortek stood on his many legs, his voice shaking. "Send a diplomatic message. Tell them we want to talk. Offer them credits, territory, anything they want." "They don't want our gifts," said Dr. Kethmori from the back of the chamber. The old scientist had been young when Earth burned. She had been one of the few to vote against the bombardment. "They want answers. They want justice. And after what we did to them, can you blame them?" The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for surrender. A few suggested fleeing to the outer rim, but Vexhai knew it was too late for any of that. The humans had planned this for 50 years. They would have thought of everything. On her flagship, Admiral Chen walked through corridors filled with purpose. Every human she passed carried the same look in their eyes. They had been born in exile, raised on stories of their lost home. Their parents had died dreaming of this day. Now it was here. Captain Maria Santos met her in the strategy room. Maps of the galaxy covered every wall. Red marks showed Galactic Council strongholds. Blue dots marked human colonies that had hidden in the darkness for decades. "The first wave is ready," Santos reported. 12 battle groups in position around key systems. The Council fleets are scrambling to respond, but they're scattered and unprepared. Chen nodded. "What about the civilian populations?" "All evacuation warnings have been broadcast as ordered. We target only military and government facilities. No innocents will die by our hand." This was important to Chen. The humans had not become monsters despite what was done to them. They remembered their humanity even in their quest for justice. Unlike those who had burned Earth, they would not commit genocide. "Admiral," came a voice from the communications station. "We're receiving surrender offers from 17 systems. They're asking for terms." "Tell them their terms are simple," Chen replied. "Complete disarmament. Full cooperation with war crimes tribunals. Reparations to be determined later. They have 1 hour to decide." Across the galaxy, panic spread faster than hyperspace travel. On Zentari Prime, emergency sessions debated impossible choices. On Morphic Station, trade barons counted their wealth and wondered if it would buy them mercy. On 100 worlds, people looked up at the stars and wondered if doom was coming. But not everyone was afraid. On the forgotten mining colonies, slaves looked at their overseers with new hope. On restricted worlds where lesser species toiled for their betters, whispered conversations spoke of liberation. The humans had not come just for revenge. They had come as the galaxy's judgment day. In the deepest vaults of Nexus Prime, ancient files were being burned. Records of secret votes, classified orders, and hidden crimes turned to ash. But the humans had spent 50 years preparing. They had spies everywhere. They had been watching and waiting and remembering. Admiral Chen stood at the great window of her ship, looking out at the heart of galactic civilization. Somewhere down there in those gleaming towers and crystal domes were the beings who had murdered her world. They had lived in luxury while human children grew up as refugees. They had celebrated their successful solution while human families mourned their dead. "Ma'am," Santos said softly, "long-range sensors show Council fleets moving to intercept us. 7 battle groups from different species. They're trying to coordinate a joint response." Chen smiled without humor. "Let them come. For 50 years we've studied their tactics, their weapons, their weaknesses. We know how they fight because we've been watching. They know nothing about us because they thought we were extinct." The first battle would begin soon. Ships would burn and warriors would die. But this was not about conquest or territory. This was about something deeper. The humans had returned not as the aggressive species the Council remembered, but as something new. They were survivors who had been forged in the fire of extinction and tempered by decades of preparation. They had become judgment itself. As the human fleet moved deeper into Council space, a simple message broadcast on all frequencies. It was not a demand or a threat. It was a promise. For Earth, for the fallen, for justice. The galaxy trembled because it finally understood what it had created 50 years ago. In trying to destroy humanity's future, the Council had given them something far more dangerous than aggression. They had given them a cause worth dying for and the patience to see it through. The reckoning had begun. The first battle lasted 17 minutes. The Zentari Third Fleet, pride of their military, met the human advance at Kepler Junction. They came in traditional formation, heavy cruisers in front, support ships behind, fighters swarming in complex patterns their ancestors had used for centuries. Admiral Korvex commanded the Zentari forces from his flagship. He had studied the old human tactics from before Earth's destruction. He expected wild charges, emotional decisions, and reckless bravery. What he got instead was something completely different. The human ships moved like they were connected by invisible threads. Each vessel knew exactly where the others would be. They flowed around the Zentari formation like water around rocks. Their weapons fired with perfect timing. In 17 minutes, the entire Third Fleet was gone. Korvex lived long enough to send one final transmission. They fight like machines but think like gods. News of the defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light. The humans had not won through superior numbers or bigger guns. They had won through perfect coordination and weapons that seemed to break the laws of physics. Their ships phased in and out of normal space. Their missiles turned corners that should have been impossible. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Chen watched the tactical display update. Blue markers showed human victories across a dozen systems. Red markers showed where Galactic Council forces had been. Most of the red markers were gone. Morphic collective defense platforms destroyed, reported Lieutenant Torres. Their impregnable fortress lasted 23 minutes. The Trilaxian border fleet has surrendered without fighting. The Vegan Trade Union is requesting immediate ceasefire talks. Chen nodded. This was going according to plan. 50 years of preparation were paying off. While the galaxy had grown soft and comfortable, humans had been learning to fight in the darkness between stars. Every battle had taught them something new. Every defeat had made them stronger. "What about civilian casualties?" Chen asked. "0 on our side. Minimal on theirs. Our precision targeting systems are working perfectly." This was crucial to Chen. The humans had not returned as monsters. They remembered what they had been before the burning of Earth, protectors of the innocent, defenders of the weak. They would not become like their enemies no matter how much they had suffered. In the Galactic Council chambers, panic ruled. Emergency sessions ran day and night. Representatives who had once voted calmly for genocide now screamed at each other in terror. The humans were not conquering planets. They were dismantling the entire power structure of galactic civilization. "How are they doing this?" demanded Chancellor Mortek. His many eyes were red from lack of sleep. "Our intelligence said they were scattered refugees living on the rim worlds." "Where did these ships come from? Where did they learn to fight like this?" Dr. Kethmori stood slowly. Age had bent her back, but her mind was still sharp. "We gave them 50 years to prepare. We thought destroying their home would break them. Instead, we gave them something to unite around. Every human child born since the burning was raised on one story: the day they would return to make things right. It's not possible, insisted General Vaxtor. No species can coordinate fleets this size across such distances. The communication delays alone should make it impossible. Unless, Kethmori said quietly, they found a way around the laws of physics, or learned to think as one mind. The room fell silent. The implications were terrifying. If the humans had developed technology beyond anything the galaxy had seen, if they had evolved into something new during their exile, then this was not just a war. It was an extinction event for the old order. On distant Kepler 7th, Captain Santos walked through the captured Council garrison. The alien soldiers sat in neat rows, their weapons piled in the center of the room. They had surrendered without a fight once they saw what happened to the Zentari fleet. "Why are you doing this?" asked Major Clix, the Trilaxian commander. His feathers were gray with fear. "What do you want from us?" Santos stopped walking. "We want justice. 50 years ago, your species voted to exterminate mine. You turned our home into a radioactive wasteland. 10 billion humans died in nuclear fire. Did you think we would just forget?" "That was a military decision," Clix protested. "Your people were expanding too fast, taking too much territory. The Council had to act to preserve peace." "Peace?" Santos's voice was cold. "You call genocide peace? You murdered children who had never left their solar system. You burned farms and schools and hospitals. You tried to erase us from history." She pointed to the display screen showing the tactical situation. Human fleets were moving deeper into Council space, sweeping aside resistance like it was nothing. "We survived," Santos continued. "We grew up in exile, but we remembered. Every human colony kept the memory alive. Every child learned the names of the dead. And slowly, carefully, we prepared for this day." "You were always the most dangerous species," Clix whispered. "That's why the Council voted for elimination. Your people never knew when to stop fighting." "You're right," Santos agreed. "We don't know when to stop. That's why we survived extinction. That's why we came back, and that's why you're going to face justice for what you did." The human fleet continued its advance. System after system fell to their coordinated assault, but they were not random attacks. Each target had been chosen carefully. Military bases that had participated in Earth's bombardment, government centers where the genocide had been planned, trade hubs that had profited from humanity's destruction, and with each victory the same message was broadcast: remember Earth, remember the 10 billion. Justice comes. The galaxy began to understand what they faced. This was not a war of conquest. It was a reckoning. The humans had spent 50 years planning not just their return, but their judgment of those who had wronged them. They had lists of names, records of votes, evidence of crimes that the galaxy thought had been buried forever. On Nexus Prime, desperate officials burned classified files and deleted computer records. But it was too late. Human agents had been watching for decades. Every secret communication, every private meeting, every casual dismissal of human rights had been recorded and remembered. The galaxy trembled because it finally understood what it had created. In trying to destroy humanity's future, the Council had forged them into something far more dangerous than an aggressive species. They had created a people united by shared trauma, prepared by decades of planning, and armed with technology born from necessity and refined by hatred. The humans had returned not as the species the galaxy remembered, but as its judgment day made flesh. The galaxy trembled when humanity arrived to settle. The score Nexus Prime had never fallen. For 3,000 years, the capital of galactic civilization had stood untouched by war. Its orbital platforms could destroy entire fleets. Its defensive systems had been built by the greatest minds of 7 species. The massive space station was home to 50 billion beings and the seat of power for 1,000 worlds. The humans took it in 3 days. Admiral Chen stood on the command deck of the Retribution as her ships surrounded the great station. Nexus Prime stretched for hundreds of kilometers in all directions. Cities, parks, government buildings, and defensive installations all built into one massive structure. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. "All defensive platforms have been neutralized," reported Captain Santos. "Their fleet has withdrawn to minimum safe distance. The station is asking for terms." "Tell them to prepare for boarding," Chen replied. "We're not here to destroy Nexus Prime. We're here to liberate it." The first human troops to set foot on the station in 50 years met no resistance. The defenders had seen what happened to military forces that opposed them. Resistance was not just useless, it was suicide. Instead, they found corridor after corridor of civilians watching with wide eyes as human soldiers moved through their home. Captain Santos led the main force toward the council chambers. Her troops moved with discipline and purpose. They were not conquerors, they were liberators. But they were also the children of a murdered world, and they had not forgotten what justice looked like. The great doors of the council chamber were sealed shut. Ancient symbols from 100 species decorated the walls, showing the long history of galactic cooperation. Santos smiled without humor. That cooperation had included voting to exterminate her people. "Open it," she ordered. Her soldiers placed charges at precise points on the door. The explosion was controlled and careful. When the smoke cleared, the humans walked into the heart of galactic power. The council representatives sat in their floating chairs and elevated platforms, arranged in the great circle that had been the center of government for millennia. Some looked defiant. Others seemed afraid. A few appeared resigned to their fate. Chancellor Mortek stood on his many legs trying to maintain dignity. "By what right do you violate this sacred chamber?" "By the right of the dead," Santos replied. "By the right of 10 billion humans who never got to see justice. By the right of survivors to call their murderers to account." She gestured, and her soldiers moved efficiently through the chamber. They were not arresting the representatives, not yet. They were doing something more important. They were taking control of the council's archives. Dr. Kethamori watched from her platform as human technicians connected devices to the council's main computer systems. "You're looking for something specific," she observed. "We're looking for the truth," Santos said. "The real records of what happened 50 years ago. Not the public version about maintaining galactic peace. The private conversations where you decided that humans were too dangerous to live." The old scientist's crest flattened with shame. "Some of us voted against it. Some of us tried to find another way." "We know," Santos replied. "We've been watching for 50 years. We know who voted for genocide and who opposed it. We know who gave the orders and who carried them out. Justice will be served, but it will be fair." The downloading continued for hours. 50 years of classified records, secret communications, and hidden decisions flowed into human databanks. Everything the council had tried to bury was being brought into the light, but it was in the deepest vaults that the humans found something that changed everything. The security doors were sealed with locks that required genetic keys from 5 different species. Only the most dangerous secrets were kept here. Santos watched as her technicians worked to break the seals. Inside they found records that made her blood run cold. Ambassador Tyrell Voss was still alive. Santos stared at the medical records in shock. Voss had been humanity's last representative to the council. He had been on Nexus Prime when the bombardment began. The official records said he died with Earth. But the truth was different. The truth was worse. They had captured him, kept him prisoner, used him for experiments to understand human psychology and biology. For 50 years, the last ambassador of Earth had been tortured in secret laboratories while the galaxy celebrated the successful elimination of the human threat. "Where is he?" Santos demanded, grabbing the nearest council member. Councillor Vexhi's blue skin was pale with terror. "Sub-level 47, Medical Research Division. But he's been down there so long, I don't know if he's still sane." Santos was already moving. Her soldiers followed as she raced through corridors that grew darker and more isolated. The lifts took them deep into the station's core, where the air recyclers hummed and maintenance systems kept the great structure alive. The medical labs were pristine and white. Banks of computers hummed quietly. Specimen containers lined the walls. And in the center, in a cell that looked like a luxury apartment but had no exits, they found him. Tyrell Voss sat in a chair by the window, looking out at a holographic display of Earth as it had been before the burning. He was old now, his hair white and his face lined with years of captivity. But his eyes were still human, still alive. "Ambassador Voss," Santos said softly as she entered the cell. He turned slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. His voice was hoarse from years of disuse. "Are you real? Or another test?" "I'm Captain Maria Santos of the United Earth Fleet," she replied. "We've come to take you home." Tears ran down his face. "Home? But Earth is gone," Santos confirmed. "But humanity survived. We scattered to the colonies. We grew strong, and we came back to settle the score." The old man stood shakily, supported by human soldiers who had been children when he was captured. "How long has it been?" 50 years, sir. 50 years we've been preparing for this day." The rescue of Ambassador Voss was broadcast across the galaxy. Here was proof that the Council's mercy had been a lie. The surgical strike against a dangerous species had been preceded by capture, torture, and experimentation. The humans had not just lost their world, they had lost their voice, their representative kept alive in secret to be studied like a laboratory animal. The political impact was immediate. Species that had remained neutral suddenly remembered old grievances against the Council. Worlds that had been conquered or suppressed saw an opportunity for freedom. The galaxy's power structure, built over thousands of years, began to crumble. On Nexus Prime, Admiral Chen received reports from across human space. The major trade routes were under human control. 3/4 of the Council fleet had been destroyed or surrendered. Civilian populations were cooperating with human occupation forces. The war was essentially over, but the reckoning was just beginning. "Set up the tribunals," Chen ordered. "Every species, every individual who voted for or participated in Earth's destruction will face justice. The galaxy will see that genocide has consequences." Standing in the great window of the Council chamber, looking out at the human fleet that surrounded their former seat of power, Chen felt the weight of 10 billion dead pressing on her shoulders. They had waited 50 years for this moment. Now it was time to make sure the galaxy never forgot what happened when it tried to erase humanity from existence. The trials would begin tomorrow, and the galaxy would learn that some crimes could never be forgiven, only punished. The galaxy trembled when humanity arrived to settle. The score of the trials began at dawn on Nexus Prime. The Great Council chamber had been converted into a courtroom, with human judges sitting where the galactic representatives once held power. Every proceeding was broadcast live across the galaxy. No secret trials, no hidden verdicts. Justice would be seen by all. Admiral Chen sat in the witness chair, her voice steady as she read the charges. Conspiracy to commit genocide, mass murder of 10 billion sentient beings, crimes against galactic peace, torture, and illegal imprisonment. The defendants sat in energy fields that prevented escape but allowed them to speak freely. Former Chancellor Mortek stood on his many legs, his voice shaking with age and fear. Around him sat the surviving members of the Council that had voted for Earth's destruction 50 years before. "We acted to preserve galactic peace," Mortek declared. Humanity was expanding too quickly, taking resources that belonged to established civilizations. "We tried diplomatic solutions first." Judge Harrison, a woman whose parents had died in Earth's burning, looked at him with cold eyes. "You tried diplomatic solutions by kidnapping and torturing our ambassador for 50 years? The courtroom fell silent. On the screens throughout the galaxy, billions of beings watched as Ambassador Voss was brought forward. The old man walked slowly but with dignity. His testimony would be the foundation of everything that followed. "Tell the court what happened to you," Judge Harrison said gently. Voss's voice carried clearly through the chamber. "I was in my quarters on Nexus Prime when the bombardment began. I tried to contact Earth to understand what was happening. Instead, Zentari security forces broke down my door. They said I was being taken into protective custody." He paused, looking directly at the defendants. Protective custody that lasted 50 years. They wanted to understand how humans thought, how we made decisions, how we could be controlled or eliminated more efficiently in the future. Every day they ran tests, psychological experiments, medical procedures. They kept me alive to study me like an animal. The evidence presented over the following days was overwhelming. Communication logs showed council members discussing the human problem in casual terms, as if debating pest control rather than the lives of 10 billion people. Military reports detailed the nuclear bombardment with clinical precision, noting the complete sterilization of Earth's surface. But it was the personal testimonies that struck the deepest. Human survivors who had fled Earth before the bombardment spoke of watching their homeworld burn from orbit. Children who had grown up in refugee camps described learning to read with books salvaged from Earth's wreckage. Soldiers told of training in the darkness between stars, preparing for a war of justice that their parents would never see. The defendants tried various defenses. Some claimed they had voted against the bombardment. Human records proved they were lying. Others said they had been pressured by their governments. The court showed evidence that many had been eager participants. A few attempted to justify their actions by painting humans as inherently aggressive and dangerous. This last defense crumbled when Captain Santos presented evidence from the human colonies. For 50 years, humans had lived peacefully alongside dozens of other species on the rim worlds. They had shared technology, intermarried, and built prosperous communities. The aggressive expansion that had worried the Council had been nothing more than normal population growth and exploration. "You didn't fear our aggression," Santos told the court. "You feared our success. Humans were proving that your old systems weren't necessary, that species could cooperate without being ruled by a central authority, that peace could exist without your control." The trials continued for months. Each day brought new revelations of corruption, cruelty, and casual disregard for life. The galaxy watched as the moral authority of the old Galactic Council was stripped away piece by piece. Species that had been dominated for centuries began to speak out about their own suffering under Council rule. The verdicts came swiftly. Chancellor Mortek and the other primary architects of the bombardment were sentenced to death. Their executions would take place on the radioactive ruins of Earth, where their victims had died. Secondary participants received terms of exile on harsh worlds, forced to survive with the same resources they had left to human refugees. But the human justice system showed mercy where the Council had shown none. Species that had opposed the bombardment or abstained from voting were offered partnerships in a new galactic order. Individuals who had tried to save human lives were pardoned and honored. Dr. Keth Mori, the Trilaxian scientist who had argued against Earth's destruction, was appointed to lead the new Galactic Ethics Committee. "The humans could have destroyed us all," she told her first meeting. Instead, they chose justice over revenge. They remembered what it meant to be civilized even when civilization had failed them. The economic consequences of the trials were as significant as the legal ones. The Zentari hegemony, primary architects of the bombardment, saw their trade networks dismantled and their military dissolved. The Morphic Collective lost their monopoly on interstellar banking when human audits revealed centuries of fraud and exploitation. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. For thousands of years, the galaxy had been ruled by the principle that might made right. The strong dominated the weak because they could. The humans had proven that justice was stronger than force. That memory was more powerful than weapons. On the anniversary of Earth's destruction, Admiral Chen stood before the assembled representatives of the new Galactic Assembly. Behind her was a holographic display of Earth as it had been. Blue oceans, green continents, cities sparkling with life. "We could have become what you feared," she told the gathering. "We had the power to destroy every world that wronged us, to make the galaxy pay in blood for the blood that was spilled. Instead, we chose to build something better." She gestured to the mixed assembly, humans, Trilaxians, vegans, and dozens of other species working together as equals rather than rulers and subjects. "This is what you were really afraid of," Chen continued. "Not human aggression, but human ideals. The idea that all species could be equal, that strength should protect the weak rather than exploit them. That justice was not the privilege of the powerful but the right of all sentient beings." The new Galactic Charter was signed that day. It bore the seal of Earth alongside the symbols of 100 liberated worlds. The first law written into the Charter was simple. Never again shall genocide be justified by the fear of what a species might become. As the ceremony ended and the representatives returned to their worlds, the galaxy had been forever changed. The trembling had stopped, replaced by something new. Hope that justice could prevail over power, that memory could triumph over convenience, that the dead could still speak through the actions of the living. The humans had returned not as conquerors but as teachers. Their lesson was written in the stars. Some crimes demand justice and some species never forget. The galaxy trembled when humanity arrived to settle. The score 2 years had passed since the Great Reckoning began. The galaxy looked very different now. Where the old Galactic Council had ruled from Nexus Prime with iron authority, the new Galactic Assembly governed through cooperation and consensus. The massive space station had been rebuilt, its towers now bearing the symbols of all member species instead of just the powerful few. Admiral Chen walked through the memorial gardens that had been built where the old council chamber once stood. Holographic trees from 1,000 worlds grew in peaceful harmony, their light shifting through colors that represented every species in the galaxy. At the center stood a simple monument, a sphere of blue and green crystal that showed Earth as it had been before the burning. The inscription beneath was written in every galactic language, in memory of the 10 billion who died so that billions more might live free. Captain Santos joined her at the memorial. Both women had aged in the past 2 years, their hair showing more gray, their faces bearing the lines of difficult decisions. But their eyes held peace now, something that had been missing during the long years of preparation and war. The final transport from the Rim worlds arrives tomorrow, Santos reported. That's the last of the human refugees being relocated to permanent homes. Chen nodded. For 50 years, humans had lived scattered across the galaxy, welcomed by some worlds but always feeling like guests in their own galaxy. Now they had choices. Terraformed planets where they could build new cities, restored colonies where they could live among the stars. Even a few brave souls who were returning to Earth to begin the long process of cleaning up their poisoned homeworld. What about the war crimes tribunals? Chen asked. Completed last month. The final verdicts were announced on Zentari Prime. The last of the bombardment coordinators have been sentenced. Some to exile, others to rehabilitation programs. A few, Santos paused. A few chose execution rather than live with their guilt. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as beings from dozens of species walked through the gardens. Children played games that mixed traditions from worlds that had never met before the humans returned. Elderly refugees from species that had been oppressed under the old council sat on benches sharing stories and memories. This was what victory looked like. Not conquered territories or subjugated enemies, but a galaxy where different species could meet as equals, where children could grow up without learning to hate their neighbors, where justice was not the privilege of the strong but the birthright of all. Ambassador Voss approached them slowly, his steps more sure than they had been when he was first rescued. 2 years of freedom and medical care had restored much of his health, though the scars of 50 years' imprisonment would never fully heal. He served now as chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, helping other survivors of council oppression find justice and healing. The Morphic Trade Collective has agreed to the reparations package, he reported. Full compensation to the families of forced laborers, restoration of stolen artwork to their original cultures, and establishment of education funds for previously restricted species. Good, Chen said. What about the Trilaxian proposal? Approved unanimously. They're creating a new university system focused on interspecies cooperation. Dr. Kethmori will serve as the first chancellor. She says she wants to spend her remaining years making sure the galaxy never forgets the lessons we've learned. The old scientist had become one of humanity's strongest allies in the new order. Her work documenting council atrocities had been crucial to the trials. More importantly, her vision of what the galaxy could become had helped shape the new constitution. As evening fell over Nexus Prime, Chen made her way to her private office. The walls were lined with photographs, images of Earth before the burning, pictures of human colonies during the dark years of exile, and scenes from the liberation of oppressed worlds. But the image that drew her attention each night was a simple one. Children from a dozen species playing together in a refugee camp, their laughter transcending language barriers. Her communication system chimed softly. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. The Vegan Liberation Front had successfully negotiated independence for their homeworld. The Altarian Mining Guild had agreed to fair wage standards for all workers regardless of species. 3 new worlds had applied for membership in the Galactic Assembly, but the most important report came from Earth itself. The cleanup teams had made remarkable progress. The radiation levels in the northern continents were dropping faster than expected. The first experimental farms were showing promising results. Marine life was beginning to return to the southern oceans. It would take centuries to fully restore Earth's biosphere, but the planet that had given birth to humanity was slowly healing. More importantly, the teams working on Earth came from dozens of species. Zentari atmospheric processors worked alongside human engineers. Trilaxian biologists collaborated with Morphic terraforming experts. The galaxy was paying its debt to humanity not with credits or trade agreements, but with their own hands and expertise. A soft knock interrupted Chen's thoughts. Captain Santos entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. a human beverage that had become popular across the galaxy during the Reconstruction years. The anniversary ceremonies are set for tomorrow, Santos reported, settling into the chair across from Chen's desk. Representatives from 400 worlds will be attending. Even some of the former council members who weren't charged with war crimes asked to speak. What will they say? Mostly apologies and promises to do better. A few want to talk about how the galaxy has changed since the trials ended. One of them, Counselor Eithmore from the Aquatic Federations, says he wants to thank humanity for showing mercy when they had every right to seek vengeance. Chen sipped her coffee, tasting the bitter strength that had sustained her people through their darkest hours. Do you think we made the right choices? Sometimes I wonder if we should have been harsher, made more examples. Santos considered this carefully. I think about the children in those camps, the ones playing together despite coming from species that had been enemies for centuries. They're growing up in a galaxy where cooperation is stronger than fear, where justice means restoration rather than destruction. That's your answer right there. The next morning, Nexus Prime filled with beings from across the galaxy. The anniversary of Earth's destruction had become something unexpected, not a day of mourning but a celebration of renewal. The galaxy remembered the dead, but it also celebrated the living and the possibilities they had created together. Admiral Chen stood before the assembled delegates, looking out at faces that represented every corner of known space. Behind her, the crystal sphere showed Earth's blue oceans and green continents, a reminder of what had been lost and what they were all working to rebuild. 2 years ago, the galaxy trembled when humanity returned, she began. Not because we brought destruction, but because we brought memory. The memory of what was done in the darkness. The memory of those who died for the crime of being different. The memory of what we could become if we chose justice over convenience. She paused, letting her words echo through the great chamber and across the communication networks that carried them to every inhabited world. Today, the galaxy no longer trembles. It stands strong because it stands together. We are no longer separate species fighting over scraps of resources and territory. We are partners in building something that has never existed before, a civilization based on equality rather than dominance. The applause that followed was not the polite acknowledgement of diplomatic gatherings. It was the genuine appreciation of beings who had lived through transformation and emerged into something better. When it faded, Chen concluded with words that would be remembered for generations. The dead can rest now. Their sacrifice was not in vain. The galaxy they died for, a galaxy of justice, equality, and hope, lives on in all of us. As the ceremony ended and the representatives prepared to return to their worlds, the crystal sphere displaying Earth continued to shine. It no longer represented loss and tragedy. It had become a symbol of what was possible when beings chose to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to remember in order to create a better future. The galaxy had trembled when humanity arrived to settle the score. Now it stood steady, strong, and united in the knowledge that some ideals were worth any sacrifice, and that justice delayed was not justice denied. It was justice made perfect by patience and wisdom. The score had been settled. The future belonged to all.